When my husband, Marcus, and I first drove into Willow Creek, it felt like stepping into a dream. The streets were lined with tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze, and every house looked picture-perfect. Freshly painted doors, neatly trimmed hedges, and flower beds bursting with color. It was exactly the kind of place we'd imagined raising our kids. We had saved for years to buy this home, and finally, it was ours. As we unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This wasn't just a house. It was the beginning of a new chapter. But there was one thing about Willow Creek that stood out right away, not in a good way. On the kitchen counter sat a small booklet labeled * Willow Creek Homeowners Association Guidelines *. At first glance, it seemed harmless enough. Rules about keeping trash bins out of sight, no loud music after 10 p.m., and restrictions on what colors you could paint your front door. Autumn gold. Approved. Burnt sienna. Not so much. I flipped through the pages while sipping coffee at the island, chuckling at some of the more specific rules. It's fine, I told myself. Just some basic guidelines to keep everything looking nice. That illusion didn't last long. On our second day in the neighborhood, a woman named Karen introduced herself as part of the welcome committee. She arrived unannounced, wearing oversized sunglasses perched on her head like a crown and carrying a clipboard that seemed to double as a weapon. Her smile was tight, almost forced, as she scanned us from head to toe. When her eyes lingered on Marcus just a little too long before flicking back to me, I felt a strange chill run down my spine. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she chirped, handing over a folder filled with papers. "You'll find all the important information here. Ree HOA rules, community events, emergency contacts. Oh, and don't forget, property values are everything here." Her words hung in the air like a warning. Property values. Was she implying something? I nodded politely, brushing it off as overly enthusiastic neighborly advice. But later, when Marcus and I discussed it, he raised an eyebrow. "Did she really say property values like that?" he asked, mimicking her tone. We both laughed it off, assuming it was just her way of emphasizing how special the neighborhood was. Still, something about Karen rubbed me the wrong way. There was an edge to her politeness, a stiffness in her demeanor that made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way she clutched her clipboard like it held state secrets, or the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't as friendly as she pretended to be. The next few days passed quietly. We spent our time settling in, meeting a few neighbors who stopped by to introduce themselves. Everyone seemed pleasant enough, though no one stayed long. It was clear they were curious about the newcomers, but not eager to stick around for deep conversations. Then came the first sign that things weren't as perfect as they appeared. One morning, I found a note taped to our front door. Written in neat block letters, it read, * Your welcome mat is crooked. Please adjust. * I stared at the paper, dumbfounded. Our welcome mat. Crooked? Who even notices such things? I glanced at Marcus, who shrugged. "Maybe it's just someone being helpful," he suggested. But deep down, I suspected otherwise. Something about the note felt calculated, like whoever wrote it wasn't trying to be helpful at all. They were testing us. And then it hit me. Karen. Her clipboard. Her obsession with property values. Suddenly, her visit didn't seem so innocent anymore. The note about the welcome mat was just the beginning. Over the next few days, more messages appeared, each one stranger than the last. One morning, I stepped outside to find a flyer taped to our garage door. * Please, ensure your curtains match the neighborhood aesthetic. * It read in the same neat handwriting. Another day, someone left a note complaining that our car, parked in the driveway overnight, was disrupting the visual harmony of the street. At first, Marcus and I laughed it off. Visual harmony. What does that even mean? He joked, holding up the note. But the humor quickly faded as the complaints grew more frequent and more personal. One evening, I discovered a handwritten letter slipped under our front door. It wasn't signed, but the message was clear. Asterisk, Willow Creek deserves better. Diversity lowers property values. Asterisk. My hands trembled as I read those words. Marcus noticed my expression and came over to see what was wrong. When he read the note, his face hardened. This isn't about rules anymore, he said quietly. It's about us. That night, we sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of notes spread out before us. Each one felt like a tiny dagger aimed straight at our hearts. Who could be behind this? Was it Karen? Or was it someone else entirely? The thought of being targeted for something as simple as the color of our skin or the fabric of our curtains was infuriating. But worse than the anger was the fear. What if this didn't stop? What if things got worse? The tension reached a breaking point when Marcus found yet another note on his windshield after work. This time, the message was blunt. Asterisk, you don't belong here. Asterisk, he crumpled it in his fist and threw it into the trash, his jaw clenched tight. We're not letting them scare us away, he said firmly. This is our home now, and no one gets to tell us otherwise. I wanted to believe him, but doubt crept in. Willow Creek had seemed so perfect when we moved in. A fresh start, a safe place for our family. Now it felt like we were walking on eggshells, waiting for the next attack. Even mundane tasks, like watering the plants or taking out the trash, felt loaded with anxiety. Every glance from a neighbor, every car driving slowly past our house, made me wonder, are they watching us? Judging us? Determined to confront the issue head-on, I decided to talk to Karen. She'd been the first person to mention property values during her visit, and her comments had stuck with me. Maybe she could shed some light on what was happening, or at least give me a sense of whether she approved of this behavior. The next afternoon, I spotted her near the community mailboxes, sorting through envelopes. Her designer sunglasses were perched on top of her head again, and she hummed softly to herself as she worked. Taking a deep breath, I approached her. "Hi, Karen," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Do you have a moment?" She looked up, startled, then quickly plastered on her usual grin. "Of course. How can I help?" I hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject without sounding accusatory. Finally, I held up one of the anonymous notes. "Have you seen these going around? They'd been showing up at our house, and honestly, they're making us uncomfortable." Karen's expression shifted ever so slightly. For a brief moment, her smile faltered, and her eyes darted away. Then, just as quickly, she recovered. "Oh dear, no idea what you're talking about," she said breezily. "Vandalism is such a shame, isn't it? You should report it to the HOA board." Her response felt rehearsed, almost robotic. I pressed further. Well, the notes seemed to focus on certain themes, like diversity lowering property values. Do you know anyone who might feel that way? Karen stiffened, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest. "Property values are important here," she replied curtly. "People invest a lot in their homes, and they expect a certain standard. Not everyone sees change as a positive thing." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Change. She wasn't talking about curtains or cars. She was talking about asterisk, about Marcus and me, about the fact that we didn't fit her narrow definition of what Willow Creek should look like. For a moment, I considered arguing back, telling her exactly how wrong she was. But instead, I took a step back, forcing myself to stay calm. "Thanks for your time," I said evenly, turning to leave. As I walked away, I could feel her eyes boring into my back, watching my every move. Later that night, Marcus listened silently as I recounted the conversation. When I finished, he sighed heavily. "So it's not just random neighbors," he said. "It's the whole system. The HOA, Karen, whoever wrote those notes. They're all connected." I nodded, feeling a mix of anger and sadness wash over me. Moving to Willow Creek had been about finding a place where we belonged. Instead, it felt like we were fighting for the right to exist in our own home. And the worst part, We weren't sure how to win. The confrontation with Karen left me feeling both furious and powerless. Her words echoed in my mind long after our conversation ended. People expect a certain standard. Not everyone sees change as a positive thing. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it, with that cold detachment, as if she were reading from a script designed to keep people like us in line. Marcus tried to reassure me that we couldn't let her get to us, but I could tell he was just as rattled as I was. That night, sleep evaded me. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction. We had since moving into Willow Creek. The notes, the whispers, Karen's smug smile. It all felt calculated, like pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together. But the bigger question loomed. What were we supposed to do about it? Ignoring the problem clearly wasn't working. Fighting back felt daunting, especially when we didn't even know who was behind most of these attacks. All we knew for sure was that someone, or maybe several someones, wanted us gone. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. If the HOA and its rules were at the center of this mess, then understanding how they operated might give us some leverage. I started by reviewing the guidelines booklet again, paying closer attention this time. At first glance, the rules seemed harmless enough. No loud music after 10 p.m. Trash bins must be stored out of sight. Holiday decorations need to come down within 2 weeks. But buried between those mundane details were stricter policies. Things like mandatory inspections, fines for non-compliance, and an appeals process that required submitting formal requests in writing. It dawned on me that these weren't just guidelines. They were tools. Tools that could easily be weaponized against anyone who didn't fit the mold. And judging by Karen's attitude, fitting the mold meant looking, acting, and living exactly the way she thought you should. Determined to learn more, I reached out to a few neighbors under the guise of getting to know them better. Most were polite but distant, offering vague answers when I asked about the HOA or Karen's role in the community. One woman, however, let something slip. Karen's? Involved, she said hesitantly, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. She's been on the board forever. People listened to her. Her tone made it clear there was more to the story, but she clammed up before I could ask anything else. Still, her comment confirmed my suspicions. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was a gatekeeper, using her position to enforce her vision of Willow Creek and exclude anyone who didn't meet her standards. Armed with this new information, I began attending community events, hoping to gather more intel. The first gathering I went to was a potluck dinner hosted by the HOA. Walking into the community center felt surreal. Everyone smiled and exchanged pleasantries, but there was an underlying tension in the room, a palpable sense that not everyone belonged. When I introduced myself to a group of women, their smiles froze briefly before returning with exaggerated brightness. "Oh, you're new here," one exclaimed, her voice dripping with forced enthusiasm. "How are you settling in?" "Great," I replied, matching her tone. "Though adapting to the rules has been interesting." The comment drew nervous laughter. "Rules can be tricky," another woman chimed in quickly. "But they're there for a reason. To keep everything running smoothly." I nodded politely, though inside I bristled at the implication. Smoothly for whom? For people like Karen, maybe. But certainly not for families like mine. As the evening wore on, I noticed Karen holding court in a corner of the room, surrounded by a small group of admirers. She gestured animatedly, her clipboard never far from reach. Watching her, I realized something important. Karen thrived on control. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was creating them, shaping the neighborhood according to her own biases. And as long as she held power, nothing would change. On the drive home, Marcus could tell I was deep in thought. "What's going on in that head of yours?" he asked. "I think I know how to fight back," I said, a plan forming in my mind. "If Karen wants to play games, then fine. Let's show her we're not afraid to play." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You've got that look in your eye. Should I be worried?" "Nope," I replied with a grin. just excited. Because sometimes the best way to take down a bully is to beat them at their own game. The idea came to me late one night as I sat scrolling through social media while Marcus watched TV in the background. A local news story caught my eye. It was about a neighborhood dispute where residents had banded together to challenge their HOA over unfair practices. What struck me most wasn't just the outcome, but how they'd done it. By documenting everything, rallying support from other homeowners, and shining a light on the hypocrisy of those in charge. That's when inspiration hit. Karen thrived on control because she operated in the shadows, hiding behind anonymous notes and vague rules. But what if we brought her tactics into the open? What if we turned the tables and made Willow Creek see her for who she really was? I shared my plan with Marcus the next morning over coffee. We're going to document every single thing, I explained. Every note, every complaint, every interaction with Karen or anyone else acting on behalf of the HOA. We'll take photos, save letters, record conversations, whatever it takes. Marcus frowned thoughtfully. And then what? Post it online. Exactly, I said, feeling a spark of determination. If Karen thinks she can intimidate us quietly, we'll make sure everyone knows exactly what's happening here. People might not care about vague complaints about property values, but they'll pay attention if they realize this is about discrimination. We started small. Whenever another note appeared on our door or windshield, I took a picture before removing it. When we received official letters from the HOA citing minor infractions, like leaving a potted plant on the porch without prior approval, I scanned them and saved digital copies. I even began keeping a journal, jotting down details of each incident, dates, times, locations, and descriptions of anyone involved. But the real breakthrough came when I discovered something unexpected. While chatting with a neighbor named Lisa, I mentioned the endless stream of complaints we'd been receiving. To my surprise, she admitted that her family had faced similar issues when they first moved in years ago. They nitpicked everything, she said softly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. It got so bad we almost left. Her words confirmed what I'd suspected all along. We weren't the only ones being targeted. Encouraged by her honesty, I asked if she'd be willing to share her experience publicly if it meant holding the HOA accountable. She hesitated but eventually nodded. Maybe it's time someone stood up to them, she said. With Lisa's tentative support, I reached out to a few other neighbors, carefully broaching the subject during casual conversations. Some were hesitant to speak out, fearing retaliation, but others opened up about their frustrations. One man recounted how he'd been fined repeatedly for having a basketball hoop in his driveway, a rule that somehow didn't apply to other families on the street. Another woman described how Karen had criticized her choice of house paint color, calling it too bold, despite it being listed as approved in the guidelines. Each story added fuel to our growing case against the HOA. Armed with evidence and allies, I created a private online group where affected residents could share their experiences anonymously. Within days, the group grew to include nearly a dozen members, all united by a shared desire for change. Meanwhile, Marcus and I decided to push back more directly. When we received yet another letter from the HOA demanding compliance with some trivial rule, I wrote a polite but firm response challenging their authority. I attached copies of previous correspondence, highlighting inconsistencies in their enforcement. Then, I posted the exchange online, along with a brief explanation of our situation. The reaction was immediate. Friends and acquaintances outside Willow Creek shared the post, drawing attention to the absurdity of the HOA's demands. Local blogs picked up the story, framing it as an example of suburban gatekeeping gone too far. For the first time since moving in, I felt like we weren't fighting alone. Karen, of course, wasn't happy. She cornered me at the mailbox one afternoon, her face flushed with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, waving a printout of my latest social media post. "I'm making sure everyone knows how hard you're working to keep Willow Creek exclusive," I replied calmly, meeting her gaze. "Isn't that what this is all about?" She sputtered, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged so openly. Before she could respond, I walked away, feeling a surge of satisfaction. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about exposing the truth and forcing Willow Creek to confront its own biases. For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful. Change wouldn't come overnight, but we were planting seeds, and sooner or later, they would grow. The ripple effect of our actions began to spread faster than I'd anticipated. After posting about the HOA's unfair practices online, the response was overwhelming. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers flooded my inbox with messages of support. Some shared their own stories of dealing with similar situations in other neighborhoods, while others offered advice on how to navigate the growing tension in Willow Creek. For the first time since moving here, I didn't feel isolated in this fight. But it wasn't just outsiders paying attention. Our neighbors were starting to take notice too. One evening, as I was watering the plants on our porch, Greg from down the street stopped by. He was usually quiet, keeping to himself, but this time he seemed unusually eager to talk. "Hey, I saw your posts," he said, shuffling his feet awkwardly. "You're not wrong about Karen. She's been running things around here like her own little kingdom for years." I nodded, inviting him to sit on the steps with me. "It's frustrating," I admitted. "We just want to live here peacefully, but it feels like we're constantly under a microscope." Greg sighed, glancing over his shoulder as if worried someone might overhear. "You're not the only ones. My wife and I got hit with fines last year because our dog barked too much, or so Karen claimed. Turns out she doesn't like dogs, period. But when we tried to appeal, no one backed us up." His admission didn't surprise me, but hearing it firsthand still stung. It was clear that Karen's influence extended far beyond minor grievances. She shaped the culture of fear and compliance in Willow Creek. Neighbors avoided rocking the boat because they didn't want to become targets themselves. That realization made me even more determined to keep pushing back. Around the same time, Lisa, the woman who had confided in me earlier, decided to join forces more openly. She started attending community events with Marcus and me, subtly encouraging other residents to speak up. At first, people hesitated, wary of drawing Karen's wrath. But as our group grew, so did their confidence. Slowly, faces that had once looked away now held eye contact a little longer. Conversations shifted from polite small talk to murmurs of dissatisfaction. Karen, of course, wasn't taking any of this lying down. Her attempts to regain control became increasingly desperate. Anonymous notes escalated into formal warnings delivered via certified mail. Minor infractions turned into major offenses overnight. One day, we received a letter claiming our garden gnomes, a playful gift from Marcus's sister, violated the no whimsical lawn ornaments rule, an offense punishable by yet another fine. Instead of caving, we doubled down. Each new accusation was met with public documentation. Photos of the offending gnome accompanied snarky captions. Asterisk, apparently. Joy is against the rules. Asterisk. The internet loved it. Local news outlets picked up the story again, dubbing us the couple fighting suburban tyranny. Even late-night comedians joked about Karen's obsession with property values and perfectly aligned mailboxes. As public scrutiny intensified, cracks began to form within the HOA itself. A few board members privately reached out to express their discomfort with Karen's leadership style. One admitted that her tactics were alienating potential buyers, which ironically hurt the very property values she claimed to protect. Another confessed that they'd voted against several of her proposals, but lacked the courage to oppose her outright. The turning point came during a heated HOA meeting. These gatherings were typically dull affairs attended only by die-hard rule enthusiasts. But this time, nearly half the neighborhood showed up, including many who had never bothered before. The room buzzed with nervous energy as Karen took her place at the front, clipboard in hand. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, heart pounding but voice steady. "This isn't about rules anymore," I said, addressing both Karen and the crowd. "It's about fairness. About making sure everyone feels welcome here, regardless of their background or what their curtains look like. Right now, that's not happening. And until it does, none of us can truly call Willow Creek home. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement when Karen tried to interrupt. Defending her actions as necessary for maintaining standards, she was met with boos. For the first time, her authority wavered. As the meeting ended, several neighbors approached us to thank us for speaking out. One woman even hugged me, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for standing up," she whispered. "I've been scared to say anything for years." Driving home that night, Marcus reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did good," he said simply. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but maybe, just maybe, it could be better. The momentum we had built was undeniable, but Karen wasn't ready to back down just yet. If anything, she grew more aggressive in her attempts to regain control. Within days of the explosive HOA meeting, a flurry of official letters arrived at our doorstep, each one citing new violations and threatening steep fines. Our mailbox was deemed structurally unsound. Our porch light was declared too bright, and even the color of our welcome mat, which I had replaced after the first note, was now labeled non-compliant. It was as if Karen was throwing everything she could think of at us, hoping something would stick. But instead of intimidating us, her tactics only fueled our resolve. Marcus and I turned each absurd accusation into an opportunity to expose the pettiness of the HOA's rules. We posted pictures online with captions like *apparently, beige mats are fine, but top is a crime against humanity and *, new porch lights could be so controversial. The internet ate it up, flooding our posts with comments of support and mockery aimed squarely at Karen and her clipboard crusade. What surprised me most, though, was how much the neighborhood dynamic began to shift. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved warmly as they passed by. Some even stopped to chat, sharing their own frustrations about Karen's reign. One afternoon, while Marcus was mowing the lawn, Greg from down the street came over carrying 2 cold sodas. "Here," he said, handing one to Marcus. "You guys deserve this." We sat on the curb together, laughing about the latest round of ridiculous complaints. "Honestly, I don't think Karen knows what to do anymore," Greg admitted. "She's losing ground fast." Word spread quickly that the tide was turning against Karen. Even longtime allies on the HOA board started distancing themselves from her. At the next meeting, attendance was higher than ever, and the mood felt electric. When Karen stood up to deliver her usual lecture about maintaining standards, her voice faltered under the weight of skeptical stares. For the first time, people openly challenged her decisions, questioning why certain rules existed in the first place. One particularly fiery exchange involved Mrs. Harper, the retired schoolteacher known for her immaculate hydrangeas. She had always been polite but distant, until now. Rising from her seat, she addressed the room with quiet authority. "I followed these guidelines for years because I thought they were meant to benefit everyone. But lately, I've realized they're being used to hurt people who don't fit some narrow idea of perfection. That's not what Willow Creek should stand for." Her words drew applause from the crowd, leaving Karen visibly shaken. As the meeting dragged on, more residents spoke out, demanding transparency and accountability. By the end, it was clear Karen's grip on the neighborhood was slipping. Still, she refused to go quietly. In a last-ditch effort to save face, she called for a special emergency session of the HOA board, claiming urgent business needed attention. Rumors circulated that she planned to push through a series of draconian new rules designed to punish dissenters, including hefty fines for anyone posting negative comments about the HOA online. When news of this reached us, Marcus and I decided to strike back before she could act. Armed with evidence of her discriminatory behavior and the growing list of grievances from neighbors, we filed a formal complaint with the County Housing Authority. We also contacted a local reporter who had covered our story before, providing them with detailed documentation of Karen's actions. The response was swift. Within days, the Housing Authority launched an investigation into the Willow Creek HOA, citing potential violations of fair housing laws. Meanwhile, the reporter published an expose highlighting the toxic culture Karen had cultivated. The article included quotes from multiple residents, along with screenshots of our social media posts and copies of the anonymous notes we'd received. Facing mounting pressure, several HOA board members resigned, citing personal reasons. Others publicly distanced themselves from Karen, calling for reform. Isolated and cornered, Karen finally relented. At a hastily arranged meeting, she announced her decision to step down as president of the HOA, citing health concerns. Her resignation letter was terse and devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to her earlier bravado. As Marcus and I watched her pack up her things and leave the community center that evening, I felt a mix of triumph and relief. This wasn't just a victory for us. It was a win for everyone who had ever felt silenced or excluded by her rigid vision of perfection. Driving home, Marcus grinned at me. "Looks like Karen's reign of terror is officially over." I smiled back, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Yeah," I said, "but the real work starts now. Let's make sure Willow Creek becomes a place where everyone feels welcome." And for the first time since moving here, I truly believed it could happen. With Karen gone, Willow Creek began to change in ways I never thought possible. The air felt lighter, as if the neighborhood had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. Without her rigid enforcement of trivial rules, people started relaxing, literally and figuratively. Curtains that didn't match the aesthetic stayed up. Mailboxes leaned slightly crooked without anyone batting an eye. And yes, my garden gnome remained proudly perched by the front walkway, a symbol of defiance turned into a mascot for our little rebellion. But it wasn't just about breaking free from Karen's control. It was about building something better. With new leadership stepping in to guide the HOA, the focus shifted from nitpicking neighbors to fostering community. Lisa volunteered to help rewrite some of the outdated guidelines, ensuring they were fair and inclusive. Greg spearheaded a neighborhood cleanup day, encouraging everyone to pitch in, not because it was mandatory, but because it was the right thing to do. Slowly, the spirit of cooperation replaced fear and resentment. One Saturday morning, Marcus and I hosted a backyard barbecue to thank our supporters. It was nothing fancy, just burgers, hot dogs, and a playlist of upbeat music, but nearly the entire neighborhood showed up. Neighbors who had once avoided us now laughed alongside us, sharing stories and swapping recipes. Kids ran around playing tag while adults lounged in lawn chairs, sipping lemonade under the shade of our big oak tree. For the first time, Willow Creek felt like more than just a collection of houses. It felt like home. As the afternoon wore on, Mrs. Harper approached me with a plate of cookies. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes glistening. "You've given us all a chance to start over." I shook my head, touched by her words. "We couldn't have done it without everyone else. This is your victory too." She smiled, patting my arm before heading back to join the crowd. Watching her go, I realized how much people craved connection, if only they weren't afraid to reach out. Breaking down walls took effort, but once those barriers fell, the bonds we formed were stronger than ever. Still, not everything changed overnight. Some residents clung to old habits, whispering disapprovingly when someone painted their door a bold color or left holiday decorations up past the deadline. But these murmurs grew quieter as the majority embraced the new atmosphere. Even Greg joked about planting a pink flamingo in his yard, just to see what happens. When no one complained, or worse, secretly admired it, the message became clear. Perfection wasn't the goal. Community was. Months later, I stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun set behind the trees. The golden light bathed our street in warmth, highlighting the small details that made Willow Creek unique. A child's bicycle lay abandoned on a driveway. Wind chimes tinkled softly in the breeze, and across the way, Lisa waved as she watered her flowers, her smile genuine and unguarded. Marcus joined me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just how far we've come," I replied. "When we first moved here, I thought this place would be perfect. Turns out it wasn't, but maybe that's okay. Maybe being real is better than being perfect." He kissed the top of my head. "You're pretty wise, you know that." I laughed, leaning into him. "Don't let it get around. I've got a reputation to maintain." The truth was, Willow Creek wasn't paradise, but it was ours. Together, we had transformed it from a place defined by rules into one shaped by kindness, empathy, and shared humanity. And though challenges would inevitably arise, I knew we were ready to face them, as a community. That night, as I tucked our kids into bed, I paused to listen to the quiet hum of the neighborhood outside. No whispers of judgment, no notes taped to doors. Just peace. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I slept soundly, knowing we belonged exactly where we were.